Joining me for this one is Chris Tsakonas. He is here to talk about Paul Mulcahy, who's visiting Xavier today on Wednesday as we record this. Chris is from Scarlet Nation, the Rutgers site for 24/7. And Chris, first of all, I just wanted to get your thoughts here when you heard the news that Paul Mulcahy, a guy who had been playing at Rutgers for the last four seasons, was going to transfer as a graduate transfer. What were kind of the thoughts that came to your mind, and what did you hear around that time when it was first announced?
Yeah, so we didn't really know right away what the status was with Paul Mulcahy. I think a lot of people in the fan base certainly thought if he wasn't going to go pro and move on from college basketball, he was going to come back. He's someone who had been very close with the Rutgers community. So I think to finally see him enter the transfer portal a few days after withdrawing from the NBA draft, I think that was a shock to a lot of people. And it's kind of something that not only is it a surprise, but it's also a blow because he was an integral part of the backcourt for some pretty successful Rutgers teams over the last 4 years. And he's going to be a big loss for Rutgers, but he could be a big pickup for Xavier or whatever program ends up landing him as a grad transfer.
So I think a lot of people have seen Paul play over the last few years, caught him at some point, and they know him as a unique player. He's 6'6", and he's a pass first point guard, which is kind of a rare combination. Aside from just those basic things that we know about him, what else would you go into when you start to describe Paul Mulcahy, the player?
Yeah, so I think the thing to keep in mind, not only is he, as you described it, a big pass first point guard, he also can score the rock. He maybe doesn't shoot it as much as you might expect given the underlying shooting numbers. Shooting last year 41% from the field and 37% from beyond the arc. But he can score the rock, and he can also play some really, really tough defense. He had a defensive rating 95.6 last season. Rutgers is a program that really prides itself on defense. So he's someone who's physical. He can defend. He can do a little bit of everything, and I think that's part of what makes him such a valuable weapon.
Yeah, Steve Peichel has really been a defense first coach. I mean, when you look at the KenPom numbers, I mean, he's never had an offense inside the top 70 in KenPom, but his defenses at times are way up there, some of the better defenses in the country. How do you see that playing out for Paul? Do you think that really fit his style of play, or would he benefit from playing a system that's maybe a little bit more wide open on the offensive end?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think he's someone who likes to use his body when he's going on the interior. He's a physical guy. He likes to get inside whenever he can when he does try to score. So I think that, if you can maybe get him more in transition, I don't know what style of play he personally would prefer. I think you could, theoretically get him into a bit more of an up tempo system and he could thrive in that. But that wasn't really the style that Rutgers was trying to play last year. It was a bit more, they would run a lot of the shot clock, and they had, guys like Cam Spencer that could shoot from beyond the arc. They had, in the case of Cliff Amore, one of the better centers in the Big Ten. It was just a different style of play. So I think a change of pace might be good for Paul. But it would be interesting to see him in a different system because we really haven't seen him play in a different kind of system at the college level. So I think from just a pure basketball perspective, that would be an intriguing thing to watch.
Yeah, that's something that really interests me when I started looking at Paul Mulcahy and the potential fit with Xavier, because Xavier is so different from Rutgers over the last few seasons, where, like you said, Rutgers is defense first, a slower style of play, a style that eats into the shot clock. And Xavier under Sean Miller last season was fly up the court, try to score in the first few seconds of the shot clock, advanced passing, a guy who can really pass the ball up the floor effectively, which is something Paul excels at, is very valuable in Xavier's system. So I do see that as a potentially interesting fit for him to get that change of scenery and really play in a very different offensive system than what he saw at Rutgers. If you were to pick out something that you thought he struggled with, what might that be?
That's a good question. I think, and people will look at his slump towards the back end. He struggled to score a lot at times and really had some performances where he was struggling, but he was also dealing with, some nagging injuries. He had injured his shoulder earlier in the year, and that was also affecting him. So I don't think, fans looking at him should look too much into that. When he's healthy, he's a much better player. I think the biggest thing would honestly, to go back to what I said before, would be probably, there are times when he can take a shot and he's capable of scoring more than I think he has, but he's often pass first, which is a good thing. But there are times when he might be willing to pass when he honestly should just take the shot himself or drive to the basket or whatever the situation may be. So I think that would probably be the one thing that stands out to me as something that he could improve on. But look, if a change of scenery can sort of, unlock him in a different way than Rutgers did, I think he could develop a little bit more. And that's not to say Rutgers didn't use him well, because he did. He was a big part of what they did. But that I think would be the one thing to work on. And I think that's something that if he can find that, I think he could be a pretty, even more of a successful player than he already has been.
Yeah, I think fans who watch the Big Ten at all, or even are on social media and see some of the viral clips, know Paul to be an emotional player, a guy who kind of wears his heart on his sleeve. What can you say about player what can you say about Paul the personality as opposed to Paul the player? He obviously has a big personality, it seems.
Yeah, and that was something that I think stood out, is not just his contribution on the floor, because he's a very passionate player, but also, in the Rutgers community. He was very involved with the community. He started the Grateful For Foundation when I want to say it was the end of his freshman year, going off the top of my head, but that was something that caught a lot of attention at the time. And, he's been, very into giving back to the community. And that's something that I think has built up, in addition to what he's done on the floor, a lot of goodwill among Rutgers fans and the Rutgers community as a whole. So I think that would be something else to keep an eye out with him.
All right, Chris, not to put you on the spot, because I think we've talked about this before we went on air. This recruitment for Paul, now that he's entered the transfer portal, has been very close to the vest. There really hasn't been a lot of information out there publicly at all. As far as what I know right now, he is visiting Xavier today on Wednesday. He's going to Notre Dame next, and he has already visited Washington. Is there any other information that you guys are hearing in the New Jersey area in terms of his recruitment right now? Is there any new intel out there?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up. We haven't gotten anything on our end that I can speak to, but that sort of seems to be where the recruitment is at this point. I think you summed it up pretty well.
All right. He is Chris Tsakonas. Chris, if Xavier fans want to follow your coverage, where can they find you at?
Well, all our content is at scarletnation.com. You can follow us there, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Tsakonas_Chris.
Awesome. Chris, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Rick.